Greetings, everybody, and welcome to our Business and Natural Capital session. We know that there's many statistics that we're hearing all the time about the problems that we're facing with nature as a society, as a planet. I think you've heard many of them. I think one of the latest is that 69% drop in wildlife population since 1970. This came out of a recent WWF report on the Living Planet report. So we're hearing all the time about the problems we're facing, but today we are here to talk about how companies are responding to this crisis, to this problem, and how it affects the running of business and what we need to do to be a better friend to nature. So I'm here with an amazing panel. My name's Liesl Truscott. I'm the Director of Insights and Accountability at Textile Exchange. We have a particular interest in climate and nature in the apparel and textile industry. But I'm going to now have a conversation with a very different set of companies and an expert from Business for Nature. So, Eva, I'm going to start with you. Tell us how dependent companies are on business. Get us started with that one.
Well, thanks so much, Liesl. And I think the question is how do you open that door, that nature door into a company? To do that first, you need to know what kind of a house you're entering, and you need to meet the company where they are. So that means understanding the maturity of the company and finding the right hook to make it material for them. So if you think about it, if a company is already well advanced on their climate transition plans, that can be a very logical way to then embed the broader nature agenda into an existing strategy, because as we know, climate and nature are completely interconnected. Sometimes it also helps to start by exploring the risks that a company might be overlooking. They might not be taking these risks into account in their everyday decision making across their supply chain and value chain. And I'm sure we'll hear a bit more from other panelists afterwards. And the core to understanding those risks is actually to understand, measure, and value the impacts and dependencies that the company has on nature. So every single company in the world today relies on nature and its services. And so if you, as examples, all companies rely on fresh water. Many nowadays rely on ecosystems to capture carbon. If you think about forests as one example, all agribusiness companies rely on healthy soils, pollination, pest control. If you think of hydropower companies, they rely on erosion control. But often these dependencies are not considered because they're free. They don't feature on the balance sheet. But in fact, we know that we're losing nature, as you just said, at an unprecedented rate. And so that presents a material risks for companies, but it also provides an opportunity. And so you can quickly, in the C-suite, in the boardroom, in technical teams, turn what is a potential doom and gloom scenario into a much more positive exchange. When you get companies excited about the potential innovation, how are they going to transform their business models to also identify competitive advantage, be part of the solution rather than the problem? And so I also think that boards need to be much more aware of upcoming regulation and legal frameworks. They need to be focused on the long-term resilience of their company. They need to be aware of how social norms are changing and the fact that they will need to contribute to a nature positive, net zero, and equitable future. And that's what will be expected of them. So I don't know how much I'll maybe hand back to you, but happy to continue the discussion.
No, that's great, Eva. Thank you so much for setting up the conversation. And I think now we'll go to Sandrine. Sandrine, you're the sustainability chief sustainability officer at Moët Hennessy. Maybe start by telling us a little bit about the company, and as a in an industry that is so dependent on nature. I'd love to hear more about your thoughts on what's going wrong with our relationship with nature, with agriculture, that we're now having to sit back and think a bit more seriously about how we farm, how we produce grapes, how we interact with landscape. So over to you, Sandrine.
Thank you, Liz. Yes, maybe a few words about Moët Hennessy. Moët Hennessy is a wine and spirit activity at LVMH. And with this activity, we have four key department activities. We have champagne activities with different maisons. We don't speak about brands, but we prefer to speak about maisons. So Moët & Chandon, Dom Pérignon, Veuve Clicquot, Ruinart, and so on. We have a spirits activity with Hennessy, the cognac Hennessy, vodka Belvedere, whiskey Glenmorangie and Ardbeg. We have sparkling wine with Chandon, and we have still wine with different maisons, with rosé, in the south of France, Château Galoupet, Minuty, Château d'Esclans, or white wine with Numancia, or white wine with in New Zealand with Cloudy Bay and in California as well with Newton. So we have many brands, and we are operating all over the world. What is very interesting, to come back to your point, of course, with nature. So we have 26 wineries all over the world with different issues, when we are talking about nature. And in fact, we have a big program called Living Soils, Living Together, in order to structure our commitments and our ambition. So in fact, we have four key pillars in our global sustainability program. And the first one is about regenerating soils, so it's one of our key priority in order to give back to the soils, and to go further than just only, if I can say something like that, to reduce our environmental impact, meaning to give more on earth and on soils particularly. Just a few words about the three other pillars. So the second one is about climate and how mitigating our climate impact. And I totally agree, with New Eva, this is completely linked, climate issue and nature and biodiversity loss issue. The third pillar is about societal aspect, and particularly because we are producing and selling alcohol, how to promote responsible drinking all over the world. And the last pillar is about our people, our team, and how to empower them, how to give more sense, and particularly, how to explain what our mission and what we want to do in terms of sustainability, in terms of environmental and social transition. So nature, as you mentioned, is in our heart of our activity. We are depending on nature. We are farmers, we are wine growers in our activity. We are very close to the nature. We perfectly see already the climate change, and we have to adapt. So when we are talking about the long-term resilience, we are fully here, and we are convinced that nature is a part of the solution. We are really often talking about nature-based solution. So in terms of agriculture, we have dedicated one specific program about regenerative agriculture, regenerative viticulture. What does it mean? It means, again, how to regenerate soils and how to foster biodiversity in our terroirs. Because we are producing mainly grapes, and we have some viticulture. We are producing as well some wines, for example, for whiskey or for for vodka, but mainly grapes. And our aim is really to be sure that nature is coming back in this type of culture. So concretely, we are really pushing, we are planting cover crops, for example, between two rows of vineyards. We are planting some cover crops in order to nurture the soils, but as well to be sure the nature is coming back, for example, insects or birds. And to do that, we are also planting some hedges, hedges and trees. This is very, very important to for sure be sure birds and insects are coming back again, and to be sure, we have not only what we call a lake of vineyard, but to redesign the landscape, and again be sure nature is coming back in our terroirs. And so really we want to try and learn different practices around regenerative agriculture, regenerative viticulture, and we are testing different practices all over the world, because again, as I mentioned, even if we have a global overview and pushing every terroirs on regenerative agriculture, we have to adapt. What does it mean concretely in terms of practices? If you are in the US or in Argentina or in New Zealand or in France, it's not exactly the same approach.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. How to share the land, how to mix in more of the natural habitats with the vineyards. That's really fascinating, and we can see the direct relationship that a company like yours has with nature. Really connected to the land. But David, I wanted to now come over to you as the head of sustainability at Reckitt, and a company that's producing a lot of household names and brands that we're all aware of in our daily lives, from cleaning products to hygiene and health products. So I wanted to ask you about the connection with the land as well. So we don't maybe immediately connect the products we call we find Reckitt producing with natural raw materials. So tell us a bit about the key raw materials and your sort of sustainability work in that area.
Thanks, Liesl, and nice to be here and talk about this. Yes, you might not first of all think about natural raw materials and health and household products that Reckitt provides, but there are a range of of natural raw materials that we use day in, day out, and the quality of them is critical. Just because it doesn't be as visible in the finished product as you might think with a food or a drink, as Sandrine has been talking about, they are still critical to our work. Take, for example, Durex, the largest global condom brand, natural latex from rubber trees in Thailand and Malaysia. Fragrances that we use that I think we're one of the largest users of lavender for fragrances in the world. Cocoa that we put alongside milk powder into growing up products for kids in Latin America. Critically, things like paper and board, which we all use as packaging, but that has a natural raw material origin, and the management of sustainable forests is critical to that. And then last, and you mentioned it already once, I think, Eva, earlier today, water. Water is a critical ingredient and a critical enabler for those other ingredients. And equally for our operations and for how people will use our products. So the connection back to natural ecosystems and nature is absolutely fundamental to our business in the health and household sector, just as it is for people in other sectors and for everybody on the planet, if I'm honest. And our approach is evolving from what was originally about how do you protect and make certain that further damage is not done to those natural ecosystems. Programs about zero deforestation, making certain that landscape management of those tropical forests for things like rubber in Southeast Asia are managed effectively and avoid further encroachment. Pollution prevention from factories, critical but baseline. Because as we look forward, it's going to be much more about how do we strengthen those ecosystems? How do we create stronger interventions to not just protect biodiversity and nature, but also to enhance it as much as we possibly can. And that's why we've been doing a lot of work with nature-based solutions at the University of Oxford to not just measure how you can assess biodiversity, but think about how you then measure the interventions and create real strength and value from that to manage both risks and develop opportunities. And then lastly, we're also thinking about it from the point of view of our consumers. And that's why through our brands like Finish, for example, if I stay with the theme of water, connecting to consumers, designing products that allow the people to use them in the home using less water, and also connecting with consumers to persuade them to do that day in, day out. So if you skip the rinse using your dishwasher, it's going to save 40 to 50 litres of water every time by avoiding pre-rinsing. That adds up to billions of litres of water every year. And that's a massive impact. Our greatest impact is through how we expand that through consumers. So we're thinking about the whole value chain and where nature is touched by our value chain, our products, and the people who use them day in, day out, about 30 million households every day. That's the connection that Reckitt has to nature.
No, thanks, David. Really well explained, and it sort of leads me to a question for both you and Sandrine about the broader stakeholder community that you're working within. Obviously, there's a lot of connection and dialogue and need for alignment with your suppliers and with your teams. But broadening that, who are the other key stakeholders that you're having to convince or bring on this journey, or are there to actually help accelerate and scale what you do, or be barriers? Where do you start with the broader stakeholders? Maybe David, and then back to Sandrine.
It's all about stakeholders. I mean, as you say, Liesl, the supplier side is a major part of it, and working with suppliers on a regular basis with action plans to protect and strengthen. I also mentioned earlier the connection we have with the University of Oxford, and that has been really critical in helping us to identify robust metrics for biodiversity. And a metric on biodiversity that also connects to carbon and social impact, because really for us, the connection is across all three of them. Climate risk is nature risk, and within that, the people who are part of those ecosystems, the farmers, the communities in and around those rubber farms I was mentioning before about in Thailand, are critical to maintaining and strengthening biodiversity and avoiding further deforestation. And so the socioeconomic impact for those communities is something we have to be alive to as well. So the work with Oxford University creates a matrix of measurement, qualitative and quantitative, that allows us to find best practice solutions for interventions that give us a carbon benefit, a nature benefit, and a socioeconomic benefit. And that means we can work with those communities, with suppliers that they're often part of, to strengthen the ecosystem effectively and know we're making a difference. That's led to us being a member of the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Risk. And that connects us there to both government conversations and, of course, investor financial sector conversations. And building that activity around disclosure, I think, on biodiversity and ecosystems will be critical going forward. For us, it's a core business conversation, because when you're dependent on latex for a product, you need to be confident that you're working to manage risks and create opportunities in that value chain to build resilience for the long term. And that means connecting with those communities, with the suppliers, and with nature, and understanding the impacts and intervening around that. That also connects through to our customers and consumers, but also other partners. We have a global partnership with WWF that helps us think very carefully about aquatic ecosystems, but also the work that we've done on with Oxford to create interventions. We translate that through to activity with customers. A fantastic example is the work we do with Airwick in Australia, where they've built seed banks to protect and strengthen local indigenous plants. And that translates equally through to work we do with consumers between our customer, Woolworths in Australia, our brand, Airwick, and connecting to consumers to give them an opportunity to influence biodiversity locally in Australia as well. So we act with all of those different stakeholders, because when it's a core business conversation, that's just a natural part of how you drive the agenda and build the agenda, managing risks and creating opportunities and meeting those different stakeholder needs.
Yeah, I love the way you bring the storytelling and the need for solid data together. And you're right that local context is critical in this case. Sandrine, Moe Hennessy's been around for centuries. Your stakeholders and shareholders have moved with the company for so many generations, and of course looking forward is something that I know you're passionate about. So tell us more about how you relate with shareholders and stakeholders.
Yeah, sure, Liz. You know, when we have this precious heritage, for so many times, you have maybe more responsibility to be sure to transmit this heritage to future generation and to involve stakeholders. That's crucial, you know, because we are buying our grapes, for example, to wine growers. So we have absolutely, this is very important for us to be sure they are all with us, you know, on the same direction. And we have to explain the direction because it's not so easy to understand, you know, and everything, and I totally agree, David, you know, everything is connected. Nature benefit, climate benefit, communities benefit, and how to be sure to explain and to transmit that with our sometimes very small wine growers who has not the maybe the resource and the tools to understand everything. So we have really to help them to understand, and this is the reason why we have decided to create a dedicated event. You know, last year in June, it was the World Living Soils Forum. So in fact, we dedicate 2 days, you know, for sharing best practices, the state of art about soils. And when I talking about soils, you know, I'm talking about biodiversity, I'm talking about water, very evident, very connected to the soil. I'm talking about climate, you know, because soils has to be the main carbon sink in the world if the soil is in good health. But we have decided to create this event, you know, and invite all our stakeholders, all our competitors, all the NGOs, and of course WWF was a part of them, all the NGOs, all the institutions and government, all the universities specialized within the soil, in order, you know, again, to be sure to gather all the intelligence, collective intelligence, to go to share and to involve the stakeholders on this specific subject. And we organized it last year in France, and we want to organize every 2 years, you know, in order to continue to share and to scale up all the best initiatives which are existing all over the world, and to share as KPIs and measure metrics as you mentioned, which are keys, in order to progress. So this is exactly what we want to do, and to continue, to involve everybody within this subject, and we need everybody in order to go further and in order to go faster, because we need absolutely to go faster on this subject. And I like, how to present, David, the issue with the benefits for nature, carbon, and social benefits. And for example, we have decided as well, forests. We mentioned as well, forest is a very interesting ecosystem. We have to protect it. So in fact, we have decided to have a partnership with Reforest Action in order to regenerate forests all over the world, meaning, first of all, of course, locally where we are. And for example, with Hensi in Charente, or in Champagne with Rina, with Moët et Chandon, but as well regenerate forests where forests need some help. So in Africa, for sure, in the US or in China, and we measure the regeneration of forests with three key KPIs: the number of trees and the number of carbon sequestration, the number of species, in order to be sure we really promote the biodiversity within the forest regeneration, and the number of people positively impact thanks to this forest regeneration. So it's always very important to keep in mind these three dimensions when, even if we are talking about nature is fully linked with the climate, and fully linked with communities.
It's a really powerful message if we can connect champagne to soil and really create that awareness and that connectivity. I think you've both spoken brilliantly to that connectivity and raising the visibility. And I know that's something that you're leading in as companies that kind of get this story, get the connection, and making such a big effort. But Eva, I wanted to go back to you to get a sense check on the world at large out there. We know we're going full circle. We are in this crisis. We are losing species. We have some amazing role models. We're talking to a couple of them here. But where is the business world generally, and what's going on in terms of sort of carrots and sticks to really support and enable, either within companies or in the wider policy and government context?
Thanks so much. It's been fascinating listening to Sandrine and David, and I think you already picked up, Liesel, on some reflections like, the importance of stakeholder engagement, the importance of understanding context and location-specific impacts. We also heard more about the importance of people being at the center, and the farmers in particular, and that often, unfortunately, gets forgotten in some conversations. I love the point I think David was making about greater biodiversity provides greater resilience of supply chains. And the headline from what we've heard so far is that nature is everyone's business. Both David and Sandrine here saying that nature is core to their business. And so I just thought I'd reflect on that as then we look at the broader business space, because it's an exciting time. I mean, we're seeing now companies putting nature higher up their corporate agenda. That has never happened before, but it's still a relatively new topic for many. And in fact, it's interesting because there's the language issue that comes in, because for many companies, they may think it's new, but actually they've already been taking action, but maybe not calling it or framing it under nature or biodiversity, like they've been working on climate, water, land restoration. And so I think we also need to just pause to react and realize that a lot of action is already happening. The main message is voluntary action is not enough. We now need to really scale and speed up action. And the main lever for that is going to be policy ambition and legal frameworks. But before I go on to that need and those carrots and sticks, Liesel, just to maybe emphasize what companies can and should be doing. Every company right now, from any sector, any geography of any size, really should be taking 4 main steps. They need to assess, commit, transform, and disclose on nature. Assess their most material impacts and dependencies, commit to setting science-based targets to make sure they are operating within planetary boundaries, transform, as that's the trickiest one. But how do you transform your operations to reduce and minimize and then restore and regenerate, which is also what we heard from both David and Sandrine, basically go through the mitigation hierarchy, make sure that companies are giving back more than they take, but then also transforming and shifting business models, thinking about services instead of more products, for example, and then disclosing on all of that. David mentioned the Task Force on Nature-related Financial Disclosures, which is an exceptional way of starting to converge. And I think one message to those listening is that there are existing frameworks to get started right now. There is existing methodologies. The science-based targets for nature are developing methodologies that will be available. And I should just add, help categorize this could be fluffy concept of nature into freshwater, land, oceans, that, by the way, need way more attention. And thankfully, we now have the High Seas Treaty that's just been adopted, and biodiversity. And then you add climate to that, and you have the top 5 key areas to look at as we consider planetary health. Of course, I did, when I'm talking about these frameworks, I wanted to say I think it's important that people listening realize that the community of initiatives and organizations actually work really well together and are very aligned. There's much more alignment than there is differences in what we're working on, but we're just really bad at communicating it. So increasingly, we need to get better at that. And I think that companies should be ready to expect more convergence and harmonization, in particular now that the International Sustainability Standards Board, the ISSB, has indicated that it's also going to focus on nature and biodiversity. So you see these streams. We have the guidelines. Now what we need is the stronger, more ambitious regulation. And we were really proud to work with so many of our partners. Over 1,000 companies were engaged in this process of influencing the UN Convention on Biological Diversity's Global Biodiversity Framework. That was in December last year. It's the equivalent of the Climate Paris Agreement. But in fact, for businesses and financial institutions, it goes much further. So what this framework now commits governments to do is to ensure that businesses, and especially large businesses and financial institutions, must assess and disclose their risks, impacts, and dependencies on nature by 2030 at the latest. That will then drive this harmonization and convergence of standards that companies can then use, but it will also then internally within companies help make better decisions. Because if you have that information inside your company, you will basically be managing your company better today and then into the future. What's happening now is that countries are now updating their national strategies and action plans. They need to do that by the next Conference of the Parties, COP16, in October 2024, hosted under the presidency of Turkey. And that means that we're now getting into that next level of implementation at a national level. Companies still have a role now to influence ambitious national regulation and policy. And that will then also help unlock financial flows into nature positive outcomes. So perhaps I'll stop there, Liesl, as I know we're getting to the end of the session.
We are, Eva. We are into the last 5 minutes, but a wonderful recap, and thank you for pulling out all the gems that we've heard over the last 35 minutes. I wanted to spend the remaining time really going around the group and maybe starting with you, David, and just in terms of where we are now in terms of this agenda. We're on the way. We have connected climate and nature as sort of two interconnected crises, but with hopefully solutions that can really help us sort of prepare or repair our relationship with the natural world. So I have a question for you around, how do you see business and nature and that relationship being repaired, and how do you how does nature bring inspiration into your life?
Well, I think Liesl, the connection that people have with the world around them is brought to life when you're in nature. It has a progressive, fantastically positive impact on well-being, and from a business point of view, it's part of resilience, but it's also an opportunity to strengthen business for the future. I look at many of the things in the SDGs, nature being part of it, as a shorthand, a proxy for a thriving society, a thriving planet, a healthier planet. And the more that we within business can help to contribute to that, then the more that business itself will thrive. And building it into core business is critical. It's not enough to think about it as a risk. It's not enough to think about it as a philanthropic intervention. I'm much more interested in leveraging the strength of a £50 billion company to strengthen our value chain and create resilience and nature-based solutions to many of the challenges that we face around the world. And that's why I was fortunate enough to be in India earlier this month. And some of the work we were doing there on catchment areas for water was critical. It was able to harvest water during the monsoon that then lasts throughout the year. It meant that the water tables were rising in the boreholes in the local communities. There was replanting going on to strengthen banks and to put carbon and new biodiversity into the mix. In fact, the only problem we came across was a leopard coming over from the protected forest to the side of it, attacking the farm's cattle. Now, that's biodiversity in action, and it's a sustainable future for the community who were getting more crops, even though the leopard was challenging some of the cattle. But this is about a thriving rural community that's at the heart of our value chain and the heart of our business. And when I see things that people and ecosystems working fantastically well together, it's inspiring for our business and it's inspiring for me.
Thank you, David. And I do think we need the inspiration when we're thinking about the enormity of it. Sandrine, over to you, an inspiring story to leave us with.
Yeah, I think the inspiring story is nature, is very positive. Even sometimes climate, it's difficult because you don't see the carbon emission. It's difficult to think in a new model. When you are talking about nature, you can see it, and it, for example, when you are planting something, you can see it. And, nature is a very good way, for example, for agriculture in order to decrease the social pressure. When you put some trees, when you redesign the landscape, it's good, and it's good for the communities again. And you can see it. So I think nature is very positive. With our role, with David and with Eva, we have to simplify, because you can already listen all these acronyms, TNFD, GBS, SBTN, SBTI, etc. So we have absolutely to make it simple for the organization to be sure, to involve our internal stakeholders, and this is crucial to involve our team and our direction for sure to go on the right way. Because in fact, honestly, I think everybody wants to do something, but we definitely need to make it simple. We definitely need to find the right KPI to in order to measure the progress. And like that, I'm sure we will go faster.
Thank you, Sandrine. Fantastic messages there. And Eva, take us out in the last few seconds.
Well, I'll just add that we cannot be paralyzed by the complexity. Somehow we think that we should be simplifying our social and environmental worlds when financial accounting and reporting is pretty complicated too, and that's man-made. So, let's overcome that. Let's overcome, because we need to act with urgency. I live in Switzerland. It's heartbreaking to see the glaciers melt in my lifetime. But the final message I would say is that no one of us can or is being asked to solve this alone, but every one of us is being asked to contribute. Either we will all reach the Global Biodiversity Framework goals and targets, either we'll all reach a nature positive world by 2030, or none of us will. So this is the ultimate joint effort for nature and for humanity.
Inspiration with a word of caution. I think that's a fantastic place to stop. And I hope everybody enjoyed the discussion today and have got a lot to reflect on. So thank you, Sandrine, Eva, David. Wonderful to have this conversation with you. Greetings and welcome to a conversation on biodiversity and natural capital. It's our closing interview today with Jim Suter. I'm Liesl Truscott, the Director of Industry Accountability and Impacts at Textile Exchange. We're a non-profit working in a very different industry to Jim, although we may discover some crossover. Textile Exchange works to improve the sustainability of the raw material production in the textile and apparel industry. So we have 15 minutes together, Jim. I'm really looking forward to it. It will go fast, but I think it would be nice to start with a little bit of an introduction to you and maybe a bit about yourself and how did you get involved with the soy industry?
Great. Thank you, Liesl. And it's a pleasure to be with you here today. So I grew up on a family cattle and crop farm in northeastern Colorado. And spent my youth growing up there, went to college and studied agricultural business and economics. Actually went back and spent a little bit of time on the farm. But then I went into industry and I worked in the global oil seeds and veg oil business, doing many different things. I worked for a large U.S. ag trading and processing company, had the opportunity to live and work around the world. And I always found the things that were going on in the protein space and the vegetable oil space very, very interesting. And then at a certain point, I had the opportunity to join the U.S. Soybean Export Council. Never really thought I would leave industry, but then I had this opportunity. And it has been very interesting to represent U.S. soy farmers and the U.S. soy industry in markets around the world, to talk with consumers of our products, to tell the story of the people that produce those, the way they get shipped, and to try and bridge that gap between consumer need in markets around the world and producers here, and be able to help the U.S. soy industry be a good supplier to customers all around the world.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to ask you about. I'm fascinated by this industry just in terms of the way it shows up in our lives. I imagine a lot of it is quite invisible to the consumer. It's coming through different supply chains. And then, of course, we're seeing a lot more of it now as a meat alternative. I'm curious to know how you're seeing the industry play out and the shifts and the demands and just how important the soybean is to our diets.
Well, it's very interesting, and it continues to grow. Actually, global consumption of soy has roughly doubled in the last 20 years. The main consumption still is in the livestock feed area. It goes into chickens, pigs, fish, and is a serious, important component of those feed ingredients. It's the second largest crop grown in the United States, just behind corn. But it's, just to give you a scope, it's a big crop grown in our country and then grown in other countries as well. The largest producers would be Brazil, the United States, Argentina, China and India would be the 5 largest producers. But in terms of other things that soy is used in, you mentioned the human utilization, and certainly plant-based foods. Things like the more traditional tofu or tempeh I mentioned earlier in various countries, but also these plant-based burgers and meat alternative products that are growing in popularity. Those are certainly an important way that soy is used. And then, of course, there's the oil component. So a soybean is roughly 80% kind of dry matter, protein-based product, and then about 20% or just a hair less oil. And that's an important constituent in cooking oil, primarily. It also goes into some bio-based fuels. And then, of course, there are some industrial uses. If you have a pair of a certain brand of tennis shoe, you may have soy oil in your sole. That's becoming popular. And also in tires. There's a large tire company in the US that puts soy oil in their tires as a replacement for petroleum-based products. So it has many diverse uses, and I think you said it well when you said it's sort of invisible to the consumer. One other thing I would just say, because I think it's important to note, we believe we're a supplier of choice. So we're here to supply the protein raw material, the protein product, the oil product that can go into numerous products. And we want to help the consumers of those find ways to use those. But we don't say one is better than the other in terms of you should consume meat or you should consume a plant-based protein. I like to think of meat as further processed soy, but both of those are great. And personally, I consume both of those myself. And I think soy has a lot of great health characteristics if people consume it, but there's many ways to do that.
That's fascinating. Yeah, just the range of products and the ways it does show up in our lives. Thanks for going into that detail, Jim. I'd like to ask you now about, with such large scale production, how are farmers, and let's focus maybe on the US since that's where you're representing the soy industry,
Right.
how are farmers and the industry approaching the need for sustainability and moving in the awareness of the impact of large scale production on our climate, on our productive land, and on our biodiversity and the natural capital side of things?
Sure, that is something that certainly has grown in interest of consumers all around the world. And I know, say, 10 years ago, when I first started to really talk with farmers about sustainability and that people around the world were interested in the sustainability of how U.S. farmers are producing their soy, first it was something that was a little bit frustrating to them. Well, who's going to tell me how to grow my crop? I know better than anybody else. And then as we dug into it deeper and we started doing some more education, there's been tremendous progress made over many more than just the last 10 years in terms of more farming in a more conservation minded way. That's the word that we tended to use in the United States. The Soil Conservation Service here was founded in 1935 as a part of the USDA. And it was really done in reaction to the Dust Bowl, to the non-conservation way that farms were being farmed 90 years ago, 80 years ago. So we've made a lot of progress since that time. And today, farmers are very proud of the way that they are farming sustainably. One of the ultimate measures of sustainability that I like to talk with them about is the multi-generational farms that most are. If you talked with some of the people on our board of directors who are farmers, they may tell you they're 5th generation or 4th generation or 7th generation. And so that to me is an ultimate measure of sustainability. But there is a lot of things that have been done. I mean, soybean is a natural sustainable plant because it is a legume. It fixes its own nitrogen. So it actually leaves fertilizer behind for the next plant that's coming. It isn't overly intensive in terms of the water it requires. The vast majority of soybeans grown in the U.S. are done so just with the rainfall that Mother Nature provides, not with very much irrigation. And it's a crop that continues to grow in production and in varieties of uses, as we talked earlier.
Mm. Yeah, that's I think you mentioned that whole sustainability journey and the improvement cycle and really sort of finding that common ground. The way I interpreted what you were saying, when we're working together with different stakeholders, different evolving pressures and consumer interests, it's really about finding that common ground to go forward. So I also wanted to ask you about, just once again sort of honing in on the US, where a lot of farming has become quite sophisticated and a lot of technology. Is there anything that just curious to know how the farmers are A, responding to the technology, and B, just sort of what impact it has with some of this high precision tools that you're using?
Sure. And I think just to highlight a couple of those, I think one of the things that has really happened over the last many years, but really has picked up pace recently, is conservation tillage. So it's the idea of leaving, not really disturbing the surface of the soil. So for many of you'll see a field out in the countryside and it'll look just like pure dirt, like it has just been turned over. And that was our old idea of farming. When I grew up on a farm, that's what we did before we ever planted a seed. We had just pure earth on top of the field. Today, that's not the way people do it. You want to leave the residue from the previous year's crop on top so you don't subject the soil to wind erosion or water erosion. And so those things can naturally break down and provide support for the future. The other big thing that's happening is is precision farming, where people are using variable rate seeding technology. So in different parts of the field, the earth will support different populations of plants. We always used to plant the same everywhere, kind of an average. Today, they have planters that can, and based upon the harvest records from the previous year, because they know what each spot in the field is capable of producing, they're able to plant just the right amount of seeds. In addition, this precision technology allows crop inputs to be able to be applied, whether it would be fertilizer or other inputs that may control weeds or those kind of things. You can do it as needed on a spot basis rather than just doing on a large broadcast basis. And so all of these things combine to make soybean farming in the U.S. a very sustainable process. And we're very proud as we look at statistics, like in the global life cycle analysis work that's been done by various groups, Blanc Consulting in Holland, the FAO has done work, and they continue to show the U.S. is having the lowest carbon footprint for soy production. So we're very proud of our farmers for the work they do in making that happen.
That's fantastic. And I think when we're all in a state of crisis or concerned about the world and nature and in one way or another. So it's really encouraging to hear you talk about all the work that's going on in the soybean industry, Jim. And just to round it off, I wanted to finish with maybe a personal note, because at the end of the day, it's all about people and relationships and, being able to apply that technology through the communities and ways of reaching each other. So for Jim Suter, what is nature and connecting to nature for you?
Yeah, that's a great question, Liesl, and I appreciate the opportunity to comment on it. So, as I have spent my career working in various parts of agriculture, having grown up on a farm and now working with many soy farmers and many soy consumers around the world, it's very gratifying for me to see the progress that has been made in terms of farming in a more sustainable way. And that has several pillars, economic, social, and environmental sustainability. And so, especially in the area of environmental sustainability, to see that we're doing this in ways that protect the land and allow us to produce more on the same footprint, because let's face it, we're going to have more and more people. Just reached 8 billion people in the world, on our way to 9.5 or 10 in the next 20 years. And it's important that we continue to be able to produce more. And what I really appreciate and enjoy from a personal perspective for myself is working with people around the world to help them to understand that sustainable practice. So when people ask me, people in far away countries, how is soy produced? Are you having to deforest? Are you hurting the land? Will you be able to continue producing in the years to come? I'm able to talk to them about these sustainable practices, and I think it reassures them. And the other thing that I really enjoy being able to work with our organization on is taking protein, soy protein, or even other forms of protein, and talking about that in places where there are shortages of protein. Because in numerous countries around the world, people and children in particular are not getting enough protein in their diets. And that has real negative consequences, whether it be stunting, whether it be lack of brain development. Those are really negative impacts. And it is possible to help that if we just continue to work on making sure that more protein can be made available to those people. And through, the power of global trade, and I know that's not such a popular topic these days, but I really think global trade and allowing things to go from where it can be produced very efficiently and effectively to places where it's needed, that will help these children that today are not getting enough protein. And so that's something that's very important to me, to be able to continue to work on behalf of U.S. soy farmers and the industry to be able to deliver.
Jim, I love the way you've brought environment, social, and people and finance and the whole picture together in a holistic way, because I think that's what it's going to take, is finding that way to balance and go forward and create a better world. So thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you. The time went fast, but it was my pleasure. Thanks so much.